It's going to go live. Hello, everybody. Pete Caliendo here. Our next guest needs no introduction. This is Baseball Outside the Box, and you also are live on Facebook. So if you have a question for our guest, please type it at the bottom of the comments section. Our next guest definitely needs no introduction. Two-time College World Series champion, manager, also Team USA coach, but he's got a bio that'll go 10 times long. I mean, he's with the ABCA. Hall of Famer. He, just a great person. You're going to learn a lot from him. I think, again, one of the best guests that we may have on. Let me welcome our good friend Tim Corbin from Vanderbilt. How you doing, Tim?
It's always good seeing you, Pete. I'm doing well, thank you.
Well, I'll tell you what. I know we know each other from the ABCA, walking around, having a few talks, and I really appreciate you doing this. You are so generous. I can see you at your stadium, so that makes you feel at home.
It does. I'm fortunate that I can be at my stadium. It's isolated because no one else is here. Otherwise, I'd be at home. But because I'm the only one here, it certainly makes me feel better about doing it. Otherwise, I wouldn't be living up to the things I talk about in terms of distancing. But it's good. I could just shut the door and be to myself.
And I'm going to start with that. But before I do, I'm going to ask you a question. You're probably going to think, where do you get this question at? All right. There's got to be some Italian in you somewhere. Have you found any Italian in you?
I wish I could say I did. I've got a little. I've got Irish. I've got German. I guess a little bit of Italian. I love Italian food, if that accounts for anything. If I'm home, I'm going to the North End in Boston. That's for sure.
And I asked that because, so you don't think I'm crazy. I asked that because of the fact that, being Italian American, my parents being from Italy and everything, I'm proud as an Italian American. I'm proud as an American. But what's unique is I study managers a lot, and there's a lot of great managers, not just in baseball, in the Major League Baseball, but in college baseball, all over the systems. And I think they make personally, I think they make good managers because of their family style, how they're growing up, their passion, all that kind of stuff. So that's why the question came up.
Well, it's interesting you said that because when you speak to that notion of Italians, and I remember in our neighborhoods, Italians were very, very family oriented, and they stayed on schedule with that too. So, and back then, I guess when you and I were growing up, similar to what's going on today, like the 70s living, a lot of people are outside and doing a lot of things as families. And in a lot of ways, that's very fulfilling.
Absolutely. And that's where I want to start with. How is Tim Corbin dealing with this situation? How are you communicating with your players? What are you telling them? And even advice for coaches?
Well, I think from a personal standpoint, it's just trying to stay in some type of routine. And that's what I've impressed upon our players, too, because I think that's so important. Your mind can go in many different directions. It can go towards the virus itself, which certainly it demands our respect, and you have to be careful about what you're doing. But at the same time, while it puts you in isolation or it puts you in positions where you're not doing things with other people, then you really can use your time wisely, and you can use your time unwisely too. And I think what I've tried to impress upon the kids is just to try to stay on some type of schedule, make a schedule for yourself, and then stick to it. And hopefully they're doing it to the best of their ability. The good thing that they have, Pete, is school, and they're still in school. So a lot of them are doing that online during the morning time, and then in the afternoon they're kind of operating to themselves. But I know it's difficult on a lot of people, but at the same time, there's a lot of people that are going through some very difficult circumstances way beyond what we're doing. So we've also talked about no complaining, because there's a lot of people who are losing lives to this and are working very hard to serve us. And we don't want to minimize any of that.
Boy, do I agree with you 100%. And I 100. And I like to look at it also as, some of the positives that will come out of this. A lot of times you hear we're never going to be the same. It's a bad thing, and we know it's bad. We know it's tough, but there's going to be some good things that are going to come out of this. Do you see that?
Of course, I think I think out of anything, I mean, Fauci, who is he's got to be a great Italian.
Yeah, he's Italian.
I listen to him a lot, and listening to him speak and so on. But I think the thing that I continue to get from him is just a common sense approach and how things are changing and how he says, normalcy won't be the same of what we know it. But you know what? 9/11 normalcy, we had some type of normalcy then, and then travel wasn't as normal as it used to be, and so on and so on. And I think, my dad, who's 90 years old, I asked him, I said, have you ever seen anything like this before? And he goes, well, not like this, but he says, we lived through the Depression. And he said, we got through the Depression. So I think, in times of our life, if we're fortunate enough to live long enough, we're going to see situations like this, and we just have to maneuver through them. But in a lot of ways, it's going to help us from a cleanliness standpoint. It's going to allow us to attack future flus and viruses in a different way. And I think that the other thing it does is it keeps us humble. We realize that, we can't get through everything that we want to. We can't do everything that we want to. So I think it allows us to reflect upon some things that we have that we sometimes take for granted.
Well, this is a great growing experience for all players, because if they can, get through this and, like you said, have a routine, that just makes them better players with dealing through adversity. Baseball, as we all know it, is a game of failure, how we look at it. So it helps us deal with that adversity too.
Well, it does. And for sure, I think we all lost something by this from an athletic standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we did, and what do you do now? We just get the opportunity to move forward with it. And I think, in the college baseball front, everyone's going to be granted another year. And if anyone told you in your life, we'll give you a year back to do the same thing that you were doing prior to it leaving, you would have said, I'll take it. And really, that's what we're getting. So, we'll get back to some type of normalcy at some point.
Tim, for a lot of the coaches out there, are you communicating with your players through either Zoom or some type of program through the phone? If you are, what's advice to coaches to kind of tell their players at this time off, they've got to stay physically fit, they've got to stay strong, they've got to, your pitchers, if the season did come back, whether it's college baseball or there's going to be other seasons coming back at the youth levels also, pitching's a big concern. What could young kids be doing at home? What's your advice to your players?
Well, I think because there's so much mystery of when we'll start again, I think the key is just a fitness standpoint. I think from a physical fitness standpoint, a lot of ways, Pete, this might be good for some kids that can just put the ball down. I don't think that's a bad thing at all.
Yes.
And at some point, Scott Brown, our pitching coach, is going to instruct them to start moving forward with their arms. And we're going to do the same thing with the position players too. I think they're going to be very antsy. I think they're going to have to be very creative in mindset in terms of what they do. A lot of these kids don't have facilities. So I go by this park every day as I drive my little four-wheeler to our field to my office. And I see this dad and I see this son, and I believe he looks to me like he's college age, but the dad, and they do this every single day at the same time. The dad must be in his 60s. He's taking balls off a tee and he's hitting ground balls to his kid. And I just see like hundreds and hundreds of balls. But I think, that's what's happening. They don't have a facility. So they're going out in the middle of a field in this park. And the dad is just hitting balls to his son. His son's picking them up, putting them in a bucket, and so on. And I think, it's just teaching us how to do things that, I guess, kids back when, 70s, early 80s, 60s, we didn't have resources. We didn't have facilities. So we improvised. We found other ways to do things. And I think that's what you're starting to see. So we try to be creative with our kids, give them thoughts, give them bands, do something from a movement standpoint. But I think they're probably doing a good job of that and figuring out different ways to add weight to a backpack, strap it to your body, do squats, what have you. Do push-ups. I think this is good for us to live a little bit primitively right now and not expect that everything's going to be handed to us.
I try to keep a routine daily, and I, sometimes in the mornings, I walk my dog an hour, listen to podcasts. I do my steps downstairs. And I don't have a very big house, but you become innovative. Now, right. Listening to you, I know you're very detailed, very, attention to detail is big for you, very organized. What's Tim Corbin's daily routine now, from the time you get up till the time you go to bed?
Well, I mean, my routine's always been that the first thing to do is work out. Maggie and I are very fortunate that years ago we had like this guest house that was part of a home that we bought. It was an old home, and we converted this guest house into a weight room, and it's substantial, and we're very fortunate to have it. And it's good for me because you talked about podcasts. I can go down there, work out, and listen to a lot of different things, and that's what I do. I just spend more time doing that. You know, when you're in season, it's probably 45 minutes to an hour, but now it's, you know, spend an hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours doing that, because I can get a lot of thoughts in too and write a lot of things down. And then I get to the office about 9:30 and just operate here until 8 o'clock at night. And then at 8 o'clock at night, Maggie's, we used to go out every night. We go out every single night and get something to eat. But since we can't do that, she goes out, brings dinner to the office. We eat dinner at the office at 8 o'clock, and then I'm in charge of picking out a documentary. And we watch a documentary for a couple hours, go home and go to bed and do it again the next day. Groundhog Day. So it's actually fine.
Is there ever, I mean, do you ever break your routine just to do something different?
No.
Just all the time straight. Fantastic.
Yes.
I love it.
No. Well, I know some people may say that guy's a simpleton, but I think we just operate in that life and we enjoy each other, so it's fun.
Well, I love what you said about simpleton, because sometimes we try to make things overly complicated. We don't keep it simple. And as a successful manager, coach, no doubt about it, what are some of the characteristics in you that you felt make you a successful person? I get it. You got to have great players and all that. We're going to talk about college recruiting. But what is that? What do you think makes you successful? And then later on, I'd like to talk about what you see in other managers also that make them successful.
I just think staying organized mentally and physically, I think that's important. Staying in some type of routine. And I say routine because I think if we're void of routine as adults or kids for that matter, we start to wander. So I keep myself from wandering as much as possible. Where I'll wander is, and I enjoy doing this on occasion, is trying to learn. I really, really love to learn. I'm curious, I think is probably an attribute that I feel is a positive thing, as I enjoy learning a lot about different people, about how you can teach, listening to younger people, because younger people are very creative in this time. And then listening to people with gray hair, because I think people with gray hair have a lot of experiences and a lot of wisdom. And I think through that, you can learn a lot from them. So I would just say the ability to stay organized, the ability to stay curious, and the ability to want to learn, and, to really enjoy my wife. I mean, I enjoy being around her. I mean, she's a lot of fun. She's funny. We can do a lot of things together. We don't get on each other's nerves. We've got two daughters that are 34 and 31 that live in Charleston, South Carolina. So a lot of our life is just spent together. You know, when we're on in season or out of season, she's at every practice. She doesn't miss a practice. She loves what we do. So we're very fortunate that we have one another and we can do these things together. And I would tell any coach, if you could somehow build that into your lifestyle, you'd be very fortunate to do what you're doing.
You know, folks on Facebook, if you have any questions, just type them. I'll try to get them in. We got a lot of people on Facebook, Tim. Very popular person here. As you talk about the attention, I want to get into a little bit of attention to detail and some of the things. I've heard I've heard you on podcasts before. I've listened to you, and you're very organized. And I mean, we're talking about, I've heard you talk about when your players are in a classroom, the way that chairs are put away. Everything. When you go to restaurants, you train them in how to tip, how to treat people. I want you to talk about how important that is, because we're only looking a lot of times College World Series winners, on the field, what they've done, but what's off the field is what creates a winning championship, it sounds like.
Well, I think so, Pete. I mean, I just think there's simple male skills, and a lot of this is selfish too. I say a lot of it. It's not selfish, but I look at it as I'm teaching and working with the kids themselves. It's, there's a lot of it that's refining myself, because once you teach, you start learning information more and more and more, and then you start to become it. And I think it's very important that regardless of what you teach, that you can model the behaviors that you're looking for, that you see in them. And I think you're just trying to enhance their abilities. Their parents have raised them for a certain amount of time, and then their parents send them off to school. And when they send them off to school, they certainly want them educated, and they certainly want them to grow as a baseball player. But I think what supersedes all of that is the fact that they can look at their child and say, you know what, he's different. He's grown in a different way. When we get him home for Christmas break, these are things that he's doing now that he never did before. And I think it's just awareness. It's just the ability of a male to look at himself and be very aware of himself, his surroundings, how he's operating in his surroundings, and his effect on other people. And I think that really gets torn down into little small things that you do, because those small things become very big in nature. And it's something that's on the front of my desk: do the small things well, the big things will take care of themselves. But the small things it's minutia, but it's not. And I would say if there's one thing that is a big part of our classroom, it is those smaller things that we try to take ownership of, and we try to be very good at them.
Now, I mentioned a couple of them. Anything else that you do particular, our coaches can learn in the U.S. and around the world, that's a routine for your players that necessarily is not always on the field?
I think it's a lot of small social skills, Pete, more than anything else. It's more than your ability to shake hands with someone, or eye contact, but it's conversation skills. It's how to have a conversation with someone and ask a lot of questions rather than being the spokesman, so to speak. It's being a very good listener. It could be as simple as brushing your teeth. I spend a lot of time talking to the kids about how to brush your teeth, because of what teeth do for you personally, but what they do for other people who are around you. They're a source of energy, and that energy is derived from the quality of your look and how you present yourself, your impressions, your first impressions, how you dress, just really how you take care of your body, how you manage your body, how you make decisions during the course of the day, the choices, because the decisions and choices really affect the trajectory of your day, and how well you're going to use your time moving forward. So I think, a lot of times as people, we look at the big things that we want to accomplish, but we can't even get there unless we do some of the smaller things well first, leading up to those big things that we want to accomplish.
Well said. I was just thinking, my dad passed away January 1st or 2nd, and, he was a perfectionist. Unfortunately, I probably didn't listen very well, because I definitely don't fit in that category. I've got to work at it constantly. My routines change sometimes. Sometimes I get a little bored, so I got to do something else.
Yep.
So I'm trying to stay in routine. Where did you pick this up? Because you hear the story about John. I think it's John Wooden, who how he spent hours on telling his players how to put their socks on. I mean, you can read about this stuff, but did you learn this from somebody, your dad, your family members, or anybody that you coached with?
I'm probably a blend of both parents. My dad was in the automotive parts business, and he was self-made. He just got through high school. He never went to college. So he had to earn his way. But from an organizational standpoint, I would point to my mom. I think my mom is continually on her feet. She's 86 years old, and she's always in motion. She never stops, and she's very, very organized inside the home. And I think when, I was just an organized kid, I do know that. I mean, I couldn't leave my room unless it was completely in its place. There was nothing on the floor. The books were stacked up at a certain level. And, I was organized in the neighborhood too. I mean, I remember starting street hockey league, and, I just organized the teams. I was almost the general manager. I put the schedule together. This is when you would play. And I just always knew it, even at that point as a young kid, that teaching and coaching was going to be part of my life. I never knew I was going to be a Division I coach, but I always knew that I was going to teach and coach, because I liked the organization of grouping and groups, and what that looked like. And So here it is today doing the same things. But I would say that my character traits and my personality traits are probably a blend of my mom and dad.
Tim, if you had to pick three, four things or five things that basically to be a very good organizer, manager, coach, for advice to our coaches out there, what would those, how would you categorize those? What the most important possibly?
Well, yeah, I think the one that's most internal is passion for what you do. I mean, I think you got to be driven by something you like to do. If it's a job or a work, then we'll do it, but we won't do it at the level that we want to. If you're driven by something that you love and someone happens to reimburse you for it, I mean, you've got a gift. And I've had a gift for 36 years. Someone has giving me the opportunity to do what I do, and then they reimburse you for it. I don't take it for granted one bit, but I really, really enjoy everything about what I do, and I don't know what I would do if I didn't do it. But I think passion is the number one thing, because I think once you have the passion, then passion gives you the energy to sustain what you're doing for periods of time. And once you lose that, then it's time to do something else, or it's time not to do it and retire. And I can't ever think of that would be the worst word in my vocabulary right there, is thinking that you couldn't do something. And I think this time right now has made me think about that too, is say, oh boy, how about if you didn't do this, what would you do? You climb walls. I think the only thing that keeps us sane right now is the fact that at some point we'll regain this normal lifestyle again. But I think passion is probably the number one thing. And then to sustain it is just your energy level towards what you do, which never forget Jack Leggett telling me this. The first thing he told me when he hired me at Clemson as a recruit, he goes, Corb, he goes, the first thing that you should do every day is work out. He says, because I don't want you to die with a black wreath over your head saying, I died for Clemson baseball by recruiting. He said your energy is
Yes.
received by what you do in the morning. And I'll never forget that. He said that. So I think you give yourself a gift by working out in the morning too, or at some point during the day. It just happens to be the morning for me. But I think what that does is it energizes you throughout the day.
Absolutely. I got to tell you, I was thinking about when you said the word passion. I listened to John Gordon's podcast, and he had Kurt Warner on there, and NFL quarterback, and what a great story. If anybody has a chance to listen to it, go to John Gordon's podcast. Awesome story. But Kurt Warner was working in a grocery store, and he was going to do whatever it took to do it perfect. And he was stocking, the shelves, but it was going to be lined up perfectly, done perfectly, no matter who was going to look at it. And I got a feeling, Tim Corbin, if you were doing anything outside of baseball, it would still be to perfection.
Well, I'd like to think so. I mean, it probably drives Maggie crazy a little bit, because I feel that way. But whether it's our house or I lined a pickleball court the other night that she and I play on right now, and it took me about 4 hours. But the reason it is because the lines weren't straight, and I wasn't going to.
I love it.
Lines were straight. So it's just one of those things that if you live by the sword, you die by the sword. And I think that's been my life. Nothing really has been out of place. And if there is, I think my players understand this. The best way to upset me is to come in my office and start moving things around. They say, if you want to drive coach crazy, do something like that, because if you do, he'll know that it's out of place, and it'll drive him crazy, and he'll put it back in place. So that would be true.
That's awesome. I'm going to throw a little curveball, because I also want to get into college recruiting a little bit. A little curveball here. And if you're sitting with some of the greatest managers, coaches, leaders, in the world, and you had to ask them a question, what would be that question?
I guess I would move towards an older coach, and in my mind, as you were asking me that, Pete, it would probably be John Wooden. And if it was John, and the only reason John Wooden, not because of the national titles, just because of the age. Pat Summitt would be someone, if she was still alive, I would love to ask her. is just what woke them up in the morning. What are the things that woke them up in the morning that got them started in terms of their thought process? What was most important to them throughout the day with their players? I guess those are the questions I would want to ask. And I would want to ask them of older coaches, just because they're older coaches have seen a lot. Love listening to Gino Auriemma. I love listening to people that have sustained and continued. And that's why I loved working with Coach Leggett, because Coach Leggett he wasn't that old, and he's older than me now, but he's in tremendous shape. But it's just watching them operate more than anything else, Pete. I think just watching people operate and how they communicate with people and what they do, those are the things that are indelible in my mind. And I think when I watch other people coach in other sports, whether it's Coach Belichick or Brad Stevens with the Celtics, it's just watching them operate and how they operate around other people and how they communicate. Those things are so important, to me as a coach and teacher.
Now, I know it wasn't intentional, but I want to remind you, you did mention out of the two coaches, one is Italian, just so you know.
Yeah, Auriemma. Yeah, I knew that. He's very proud of it too. He should be. Yeah.
Great guy. All right. Interesting. I want to hit practice for a second here because of the attention to detail you have. Over the years, have you changed your routine, how you prepare for your practices, as far as the organization, getting along with your coaches, how the players know what you're going to do? A little advice on that for our coaches.
Well, I would say I've modified it more than anything else. I really, really enjoy practice, but and I'm not trying to be a booksmith here and change the terminology, but I think what we've done is practice is that segment of time that you utilize as a player prior to the time training starts. So really for us, we call practice training. And the reason we do is because we just want to dignify both in terms of training is team play. Training is when we hit the field, that is a team operation. Practice, on the other hand, is something that you would do if you went out on a green and you putted 200 times. That would be practice. And what we try to do is teach our kids how to practice, because that time is very, very important. But it's the lead up time into training. And training for us, if we start training at 2:30, training always starts in the classroom. It lasts about a half an hour. That's where I use that time to center the players, talk about what we're going to do. It's really my main source of communication, because once we get to the field, I don't want to communicate as much. I want that to be their playground. I want that to be their time. So when they go to the field, that's when training takes place. And training, whether it's 2 hours or 4 hours, that's a team operation. But practice is the time that they use to get themselves ready for training. And that's very deliberate. That's very conscious. They take it upon themselves with the help of the coaches. And we've got some great coaches that help them with that period, so that when they get to the field for training, they're mentally and physically ready to go. So we really emphasize it. I would say that the first month that we're at Vanderbilt, we spend a lot of time in the classroom talking about practicing and talking about training and showing them what it looks like. Because I think for a lot of kids, you got to paint that picture and you got to give them a visual of what it looks like in the practice period, and then what it looks like in the training period. And then when you get to the training period, they start emphasizing that period, because they know that the days in between the games are the most important days inside of a team. It's if you've got to get those days right. If you knock those days out right in April and May, when you're in mid-season form, then really what you're doing is you're really focusing on the key areas that are going to help you improve. And the training period is where you improve the most. And I know everyone is locked in on the outcomes and the scoreboard, and I get it, but you can't have positive outcomes on a scoreboard until you refine and you really define the training period in which you make important for the kids. So that's really, we've kind of modified that through the years with the help of a great staff with Scott Brown and David Macias and Mike Baxter, who both the latter two played for me here, and Brownie's been with me 9 years. So we're very fortunate to have them.
Hey, Tim, maybe we're going to speak a minute here to the players possibly, but I believe coaches also, especially at the younger levels, because you hear this all the time. You got to hustle all the time. Players don't hustle enough. I believe that you have to create a habit to do that. I understand you can say hustle, and maybe they might hustle, maybe they won't. I believe you have to start young with that good habit. How important is that to you? And when players get to college baseball, how important is that? The ability to do that.
Well, it's really important because it's a personality trait, and it creates so much positivity for your team when your team is doing it. But I would say this: if I have to mention that, shame on me. If you go to a playground and watch 5 and 6 and 7 and 8-year-olds, there's no adult out there saying hustle. But
right.
Those kids are wound up like tops, and they are moving at a frenetic speed in which they're having fun. And I think the goal of a teacher and a coach is to try to create that for a 18, 19, and 20-year-old kid that can look at that space and say, you know what, coach, I love it. I love being out here where you've created an environment where we can have fun and get better. And I think when you do that, you become more of a facilitator than anything else. I mean, I know teaching's a big piece of this, but I think when you facilitate an environment where the kids are hustling and that word's not used, then you've created a pretty good environment. And I'm not saying you have to remind kids, because I think every so often you do have to remind kids. And I think a letdown for me would be if we went out there and I felt like the kids weren't enjoying themselves. They weren't having fun. And I think if they're doing that, you kind of got to reset as a coach and say, okay, I would take that personally. That's my fault. Either I haven't identified the situation well enough, or I haven't created, and I say we, because it's all of us, it's not just I, but we haven't created a situation where it allows the kids to perform with the positivity and the energy that will allow them to grow.
When Tim Corbin and his staff was working during practice, you mentioned the word fun. Talk to our coaches. If you're going to make practice fun, if it's a vital part of learning, give some advice how you're going to do that. Because a lot of people say, well, just have fun. Well, but there's got to be a way to teach that or do it or somewhere in that area.
Well, I say to create movement. I think that baseball can be a very stationary sport. And I think to have players operating and moving at one time is important. Can that happen? It can happen. Is it easy? It's not easy, but you have to be creative in nature in order to do it. The other thing is you have to create competition. And whether it's small or big, you have to create competition within the training environment. Whether it's a stopwatch, whether it's keeping score, whether it's a game, I think creative activity or competitive activity inspires kids to want to move and want to perform. And I think that's what you do. And I think that's where the fun comes in. FUN, I know that's said a lot, but I think that's all about the people and the space that you're doing it. And if your people are organized and they're moving towards something and they're getting better and the space is positive, then I think what you're going to have is you are going to have that FUN word.
It's got to be a blast coming to your practice, and I'm sure you have coaches who come just to watch how you guys do things. How do you deal with you're running a defensive situation? It could be a bunt situation, or it could be an offensive thing in practice, and things quite don't go the way you want them to go. How does your staff deal with that? How do you make the corrections?
Well, that's interesting. Years ago, we probably would have stopped training and made the correction. Today, we don't stop. We just keep going. And I think the greatest thing about the classroom and what we've done is we video our training sessions. So if we did make a mistake, Pete, then we can come back the next day before training and inside the classroom review what we did and say, okay, fellas, let's just take a look at this. Okay, this doesn't look right, and here's why. And then correct it there. And then when you get to the field, the key here is it's their space. When you make the training environment their space, you empower them to own that space. And when they own that space, they take charge of it. And when they take charge of it, you're giving them a gift of, okay, this is our space. Coach is facilitating it, he's organizing it, but at the same time, this is ours. This is ours to do whatever we want to do it. It's our canvas, so to speak. So we'll kind of paint what we want to paint with a management style coming from our pitching coach and hitting instructors and fielding coaches and so on. But it becomes their space. But I think anytime we want to refine it or define it better, then what we do is we use that time prior to training inside of a classroom session where we can break it down again, say, okay, no, this is what it looks like when it's done well. When it's done well, it's very fulfilling. But I think the key is making it their space. But the other thing, and I don't want to forget this, you got to be on as a teacher. You have to be on. You can't just go down there. And I'm not saying everyone has the same personality and is loud and so on.
Yeah.
But I think as a teacher, you got to be on. Your brain has to be turned on. And if you don't have those expectations every single day, well, then expect to get let down and expect to have the situation that's average. And if you don't want it to be average, then you've got to be turned on personally. And that means you personally and your coaches and your staff. And if everyone's turned on mentally, then you've got a chance to have a very upbeat and energetic training environment.
When Tim Corbin's done with practice, mentally, physically exhausted?
Oh, I think you have to be, Pete. I mean, I do. I think you have to be. I think if what you do or what I do or what anyone does, or these unbelievable doctors who walk by my office every single day, I just use this as an example. They look like right now, and I say this positively, but it's not. They look like they're going to a funeral, and when they're done for the day, they look like they're returning from war. You can just tell that they've exhausted their mind and bodies into what they're doing, and they've given everything they've got. Goes back to passion. I think if you're passionate about what you're doing, at the end of the day, you should hit the bed, and you're not worried about taking a pill or glass of wine to go to bed. You're going, boom, I'm done. And, I'm not saying I feel like that every night, but I think it's the greatest feeling in the world when you go to bed and then you wake up the next morning and say, I didn't even toss or think about turning one time. I was just absolutely maxed. And that's a very good feeling personally.
And I got to believe those doctors are dealing with life and death currently now. And one thing, once they're in that room with that patient, I'll bet they are the most positive, energetic people because they've got to be there for their patient also.
It's like giving your team the face it needs. And I think a lot of times they got to give their patient the face they need. They may understand something that patient doesn't understand, and it may be in a grave situation, but bedside manner, you know what? Coach side manner, same thing. When you're in a dugout, you're next to a bed and you're treating a patient, you're giving people the face they need, and you give someone the face they need, you're giving that person some confidence. You're uplifting to that person. That is such a big deal. And I realized that because there was a time, Pete, and there still is on occasion, and my wife is a good teammate for me, is she's let me know on several occasions that your body language has to improve here. Your body language has to improve. If you want something out of these kids, you better get something out of yourself first, and your body language is most important. So, I've taken that to heart. That's a very important piece of teaching and coaching is being there physically from a body language standpoint for your kids.
So well said. Love it. I also want to ask you this because players sometimes, to get back to practice for a second,
Yep.
It's the first time they get to Vanderbilt, right? And maybe now you're going to work on a defensive situation. It could be bunting, could be first and third situation. How do you start that? Because, is it start in the classroom? Does it start in the field? How do you lay out what your system is to learn the best way?
Mm-hmm.
Or the fastest way, let's put it that way, more economic.
Right. Well, I was very fortunate that I was a student assistant in football when I was in college, and it's because we didn't have fall baseball. So my roommates, I had 3 football players for roommates, and our one of the assistant football coaches was the head baseball coach, a guy named Kevin Colbert, who's now the general manager for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Well, he just took me under his wing and I became a student assistant in football. But what I learned in football, and the reason I brought that up, is because I learned the teaching element of football that I've applied towards baseball. And to that fact, everything that we teach on the field has to happen in the classroom first. So if it is a bunt defense, if it is a first and third defense, that is all taught up in the classroom. It's written down by the players inside of a notebook. It's either PowerPointed or it's animated in a way that they can start to see it play out a little bit. It's almost like a play where, it's a dress rehearsal. You're looking at it first, and it's almost like it's steps. It's teaching it first, and then it's a walkthrough, and then after you do the walkthrough, it's kind of okay. Let's run through, and then let's add a ball. Now let's add a participant, and I think you do it in steps. And I think that's the one thing I learned about football is everything done in football is done with two people first or one person first. Then we'll add some linemen to it, and then we'll start to add half a line. Now we'll start to add one side of the line, and so on to the point where you do things in steps and you do them in gradual progression so the kids start to understand their job. And once they start to understand their job, then they understand that their job is crucial to how the team operates getting the job done. So I think that's the one thing I learned about football that's essential to how I teach today.
Coach, I want to jump to your players now. I want to ask you, when it comes to being successful, when you think about success in college baseball, do you look at it as, well, winning the College World Series, or is there more to it than just that? And I don't want to demean winning a College World Series. That's awesome. But is there just more of that than just College World Series champion? Because not everybody's going to do that within their career.
No, the fact that we've done it once is unbelievable. The fact that we've done it twice, it's unfathomable. I mean, you don't win national championships. You don't win world championships. I mean, I think if you get away from that, that could be the goal, and I get it. But, and I've learned this, is that just is such a far reach outcome that it's better that, okay, it's a goal, but at the same time, you got to find happiness doing other things. And I think the growth and the harmony of your team is probably the most satisfying thing to us right now is having a team that really enjoys being around one another and enjoys the environment. And when you get them together, the environment's better because they're in it. And I think when you can walk away from a group of kids and say that was a very satisfying experience, then you don't need a gold trophy to tell you that, okay, we needed to win a national championship in order for this to be a fulfilling experience. I can look at several trophies above me right now, and there is a gold trophy and another gold trophy and a silver trophy. And the silver trophy is when we were runners up in 2015. The only difference in that silver trophy and the gold trophy is a half an inch. But the difference is the half an inch, it doesn't matter, because when I look at 2015, it was one of the greatest teams we've ever had at Vanderbilt. And I'll always look at them as being, they satisfied their goals of just enjoying being around one another and in creating an environment that everyone wanted to be at every single day. And so much so that the training environment, you walk away off the field every day and go, my gosh, we won the training environment today. They treated it like it was the last day every day that they were here. And so I think, winning a conference championship, a state championship, what have you, it's all great. But I think the focus is just trying to build harmony within your team on a day-to-day basis.
In college baseball, you hear this a lot within coaches or players or parents, that to be a very good, successful, college program, recruiting is the name of the game. Now, that's one aspect of it. So is that true? And two, there's other facets to being successful. What would those other be in preparing a successful, team? Is it just recruiting?
Well, recruiting's a big part of it, but I would say recruiting is all about fit. It's trying to find the right fit for your program, whatever that may be. And I think that's true of coaches too. There's a lot of coaches that go off and they take jobs in certain areas and they might not be the right fit for that job. So I think when it gets right down to it, when you're trying to get players, you're trying to find the player that fits your style and your personality as a program. And I think that's very, very important. Beyond that, I think once you find the players that you think fit your style, then I just think it's going back to what I said at the beginning, Pete. It's really the organization, the daily organization of how you take them through days, and really the concentration of the days that you're in, and not looking ahead, and really staying focused and centralized on what you're doing on that particular day. If they can walk away from days and go, okay, I actually got better today individually, and our team actually got better today as a group, then really what you're doing is you're setting them up for future successes. And it's not a guarantee, because nothing's a guarantee in life, but at the same time, I think you're setting them up for future successes that are going to come along. So I think it's finding the right fits, and then from there, it's organizing those fits almost like it's your own family and bringing them along very slowly.
Love the family. Love it, love it, love it. And I got to ask you this, because as you're recruiting, I think a lot of people understand the skill aspect of it, what you're looking for and all that. But talk about what you look for in the actual player, the mental part, not the skills. Talk about what, if you're talking to players, what do you look for when you go to a ball game other than their actual skills?
Their care level for what they're doing. And care level to me is easy to see, because if someone cares about what they're doing, then they care about how they approach it. They care about who they do it with. They care about taking care of the people they do it with. It's someone who's very group oriented. It's someone that really enjoys doing things for the sake of other people. And when you do what you do, and in our way of life, it's baseball. When we do it for people outside of ourselves, and we do it because of other people outside of ourselves, then it's so gratifying and so fulfilling. And I think today, in a world that we live in, we are trying to reach individually, but I think the deal for a teacher is try to bring individuals in, blend them together, and to try to get a unified thought on, yes, we're going to get better individually, because by getting better individually, we're helping the group effort. And I think that's really what I'm looking for, is just a high care level in a kid. You get a kid who cares about everything he's doing, then he's going to be good and passionate about what he's doing and how he's doing it.
You know, I remember reading, I believe it was John Wooden, and I want to ask you if you've had this experience and how you reacted to it. But he talked about going to someone's house. It was a number one draft pick, or number one pick, excuse me. And he was there with an assistant, and he had a contract, or ready to sign and everything. And he never had the kid sign anything. He walked out, and his assistant asked him, I thought, this is a number one guy. Because why didn't you pick him? He goes, and his answer was he didn't like the way he talked to his mom. And he didn't want that type of player on his team. Have you had experiences like that?
Yes, and I tell it at the camp all the time. I was at a high school game of a very good player, and Coach Leggett sent me to see him. And the reason he sent me to see him is because he said, we just want to find out. I just want you to determine how much scholarship we should offer this kid. So I went and see him. Long story short, I saw his mother come out of the stands and hand the young man a Gatorade. The kid took a sip of the Gatorade, put the cap back on barely, and then tossed it back down at his mom at her feet. And he never said anything to his mom. He just turned around and walked the other way. And when I went back and told Coach Leggett that story, he said, how much should we offer him? I said, you should offer him nothing. He goes, come on, Corbs. He goes, this guy's a good player. And I said, you don't want to offer him anything. And then I proceeded to tell him why. And I said, if he can do that to a lifetime teammate, his mom, then he can do anything to you, and he can do anything to me. The respect that you have for your parents is paramount on how you ideally will treat other people outside of your own home. And if you don't have that character trait or fiber, the cement's dry. I mean, it's you can't mold that. It's already dry. It's already in place. And I think, unfortunately, we can modify behaviors, But we as teachers and coaches, regardless of how we feel about ourselves and how good we feel about ourselves, you can't modify that behavior. That modify is that's already set. That's a clear indication of a guy or a girl for that matter that is not going to have respect for you or the situation when it presents itself. And I think that young man went on and he became a professional player, but he also, in the 8 years that he played, he was part of 9 different organizations. So there you go.
Wow, well said. I'll tell you what, great story for young kids to hear at the camps, especially when they're hearing it from a college baseball coach. Coach, you've been more than generous. We're coming to the end. I really appreciate this. I could ask 1,000 questions here, but I want, on the same basis, if you've got to, I remember being with the Schaumburg Flyers. I had to make final decisions on cutting players, never an easy thing. But if you came down to 2 players who had similar skills, and you had to make a decision, what characteristics would you be looking for? And it could follow some of the things we just talked about, but we might learn some from that.
Personality traits, quality personality traits, good fibers, someone who's very, very interested in the team, someone who has very, very good energy. Because if you're adding another player to a roster, you certainly don't want it to be a player that's going to take energy away from the group. It's someone who's going to give energy to the group. And if that player even is a little bit less skill-wise, Pete, but he gives your team more. In my way of thinking, there's playing roles. Those are the guys who participate on the field or on the court. And then there's team roles. And there is always a place for a person on a team that might not necessarily be an active participant on the field all the time, but what he does for your team, whether it's off the court or off the field or inside of a locker room, he's basically building the team environment because of his positivity and because he's in it. And if you take that person away sometimes, you're saying to yourself, we just don't need that person because he's not good enough to play here. Check yourself, because if he adds something to the team, keep him, because what he's doing is he's creating harmony. And all you have to do, you have to go no further than some great organizations in sport today. And there's a reason why Matt Slater continues to be on special teams with the New England Patriots and play. It's because he's got character traits that supersede skill. And now I'm not telling you he's not skilled, because he is skilled, but there's a reason why those people stick, and there's a reason why organizations continue to sign them. And it's because what they do is they create leadership and harmony inside of the environment. And that you have to have that in order to have a successful organization and team.
Wow, explosive. Coach, final question. It's it's outside the box, let's call it. Baseball's always been a traditional game, and understandably, there's some great things in tradition. But at times, some guys kind of changing tradition a little bit. You hear a lot about the cardinal rules. Not sure where they got that. I'm sure there's a history. Have you changed when it comes to a little bit about tradition, how you coach, how you do things? I mean, or you just follow the book, or a little bit, just a little advice for our coaches? Should they be themselves and believe in what they're doing?
Well, I think you got to believe in what you're doing, but I think you always look to yourself. And the thing I try to do literally is fire myself every year and say, okay, if I didn't have this position, why wouldn't I have this position? And if those are the things that are holding me back, refine myself to get better so I can add to the experience of myself. The reason being, add to the experience of myself, because if you're creating an experience for your players, you've got to get better yourself. And if you're asking your players to get better, you better get better within that same environment. Because if you're teaching and coaching and you are setting the tone and you are modeling, then God forbid, if you're going in a different direction than your players, then it's not going to sustain itself. So, yeah, I would say that I'm continually trying to modify myself. I'm always trying to reinvent myself and not completely change. But I think you always have to look at yourself as being, someone that is recreating, that is reinventing. You have to reinvent yourself in order to get better for the sake of your players.
And like I said, we could be on here for hours. Final thing for our coaches, players, even parents around the world and the U.S., any last minute advice as far as getting into coaching or anything about coaching or life in general?
Well, I just think teaching is the greatest thing that you can do, because it gives you an opportunity to be around people, and those people create energy for you, and you create energy for them. I think as a parent, if I just had one thing for a parent, is just release the opportunity to your child. Once your child makes a decision to do something, be there for them, but at the same time, don't be in front of them. Let them enjoy it. Let them do it. And be there for them in other areas. I've seen a lot of ball players that have come in this office and told me that they'd rather see their grandparents at games than their dad or mom. And I ask them why, and they say because that's all they want to do is talk about my performance after it's done. My grandparents, all they want to talk about is where I want to go eat. So I think, a lot of times these kids need a mental break from what they're doing. And I think to help them find their passion, but then once they find their passion, empower them to grow into it themselves. Don't be there in front of them making the decisions for them. Allow them to make the decisions for themselves, so they can grow, and you can empower them to be more positive within their own decision making processes.
Great advice. And folks, if there's a gold standard, this is certainly platinum. Outstanding show. Coach Corbin, can't thank you enough. I know you're very busy even during these times. So thanks again. God bless you for what you do for all our players, college baseball, youth players, youth coaches. Thank you. And hopefully we get to see you soon, either at the ABCA or on the field somewhere.
My pleasure, Pete. Thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity.
All right, folks, that's Coach Corbin, two-time College World Series coach and just an outstanding person. I want to thank our folks in the U.S. and around the world, our folks also on Facebook Live. Thank you for being on the show. We will make sure that we put all the show notes on the website. Follow it there. My name is Pete Caliendo. I'm the host of Baseball Outside the Box. I want to wish all of you a safe day. Stay safe. Do the things you're supposed to do. We'll be back on the field. So God bless you all, and we'll see you on the next show.